Hey, it's Ollie, and in this video we're going to talk about an interesting concept in learning, which is that of quantity over quality. Quantity over quality. All right, now, usually in most walks of life you hear the opposite, don't you? You hear quality over quantity. And, there's lots of cases where that is probably the best course of action. Spending time with friends or family, reading literature, whatever it may be. Quality over quantity, right? But not so with language learning. There are, wherever you look in language learning, there are ample examples of where quality, so you think you're doing something in depth, sounds intuitively to be right and to be a good way forward, but actually it doesn't get you anywhere. Steve Kaufmann released a video a short while ago called Learn Vocabulary Fast. Great video. I'll link to this in the show notes if I remember to do so. And in it, he mentioned I think it was a tweet that he saw from some well-known teacher, language teacher, who said the best way to learn vocabulary is to have a vocabulary notebook of sorts, where you kind of write down all the things you can about the word class, the pronunciation, example sentences, collocations, things like that. And by going into depth, that's how you're going to learn a word really, really well. Now, this struck a chord with me because I remember when I was in Japan and I was teaching in Japan, it was really in vogue in the staff room where I was working for a while to give students in your classes these worksheets where you'd have like a double-sided sheet for one vocabulary item. So what you'd do is you'd write that word in the box at the top, and then you'd write down, is it an adjective or an adverb or a noun or whatever. You'd write down the phonetic pronunciation so that you know how to pronounce it properly. You'd write down common collocations that word is found in. You'd write down 4 or 5 example sentences in the target language, translations of those sentences into English, all this stuff, right? Which in theory sounds like a good idea. It's a very scholarly thing to do. It's the kind of thing that you might intuitively think makes sense. But the trouble is, as you know, if you've ever done any kind of traditional study, if you try and learn something in this way, doesn't matter how much work you do on it, you're still likely to forget it the next day, because that's the way our brains work. Our brains are not designed to remember things first time. The way that we learn stuff is through an ongoing process of repetition. Okay, and the great thing about repetition is that by repeating stuff and by seeing it over and over again over a period of days or weeks, you give your brain the chance to remember stuff naturally, which removes the need for all these annoying time-consuming exercises in the first place. Okay, so this is where the idea of quantity over quality comes in. If you focus on quality, meaning like intensive, deliberate study, what happens is that you kind of engage in your grey matter, maybe, but that doesn't help you. There's a very, very thin link between that and actually remembering or acquiring what you're studying. Okay, but by having an approach that focuses on quantity, in other words, you see these words and phrases and grammar, whatever it is, many, many times over, you give your brain the opportunity to remember it naturally, which is a lot more fun, it's a lot more effective, but also it means that you can cover a lot more ground. Okay, and the best way to do this is with lots and lots of input, lots and lots of time spent listening to the language, spent reading the language, and if you can control the material that you're using so that it's not too hard, and it's not too long, so you don't get overwhelmed, then you can kind of repeat the stuff that you're listening to or reading on a daily or weekly basis, and that is how you can cover a lot more ground. Steve's point in his video was that if you need to learn, if you let's start with the principle that you need to learn thousands of words to become comfortable in a language. Right? Let's take 5,000 words as a kind of baseline for being conversationally competent in the language. That is I think it's a useful figure. It's probably not that accurate, but let's say that you're going to aim to acquire around 5,000 words to be comfortable in the language. Now, even if you're learning a word a day with this kind of method I described earlier of kind of this forensic examination of the word on a piece of paper, it's going to take you 5,000 days to learn the 5,000 words you need. It's too slow. And so the quantity over quality approach gets around that problem by saying, right, we're going to look at we're going to take the sources of material that we like, the articles, the books, the stories, we're gonna spend time with them every single day, come back to them on a regular basis, and just give our brain chance to acquire that stuff. I think what I've noticed happening is that as you get more advanced in a language, that starts to reverse. Okay, so as you reach higher levels, then you kind of get into a quality over quantity situation, because the amount of unknown material in the language then is starting to reduce. And so the way that you can keep progressing is by understanding those more intricate grammar points, for example, or learning your, some of the more academic or specific topic subject specific vocabulary in a language. That's where you kind of have to take a more academic approach to doing it. But you see, I've been finding this in my Japanese recently, because I have a upper intermediate level of Japanese, and but I've always been more of a speaker than a reader in Japanese, partly because of the difficulty with learning kanji and so on. And so my Japanese is much more kind of casual and spoken, and I've always struggled with keigo, which is the more formal side of Japanese. Always struggled with it. But recently, what I've been doing is spending a lot, because I've been adjusting the way that I've been approaching all of my language learning into spending much more time with input, with reading and listening. I've been reading stuff that I find interesting, which in the case of Japanese is, for some reason, I've got very, very interested in articles on applied linguistics in Japanese. So I've been reading all this stuff and listening to all this stuff, mostly using Link, actually, which is a fantastic tool. I've been reading and listening to all this stuff about linguistics in Japanese, and it's very formal language. And when I first started, I struggled with it. The amount of unfamiliar stuff was just overwhelming. But I kept at it, and I read and listen to this stuff every day now, and I make a point of not staying for too long on the same articles. Like, I tend to move on to new things, and then I come back and re-listen to that stuff a few days later in this kind of big continuous cycle. And what I found is that over the course of just a few weeks, a lot of this stuff that was very kind of opaque for me just a month or so ago has now become totally normal. And I've kind of got used to these very kind of these very formal academic sentence endings, for example, in Japanese, that you would never ever say, or you'd never hear in conversation. So I just didn't know them, because I just spent all my time Japanese speaking with speaking. But they've just suddenly become second nature. I've been writing a list down of them, actually, because it's so interesting to see what they are. These in Japanese, these sentence endings like 立証されています。実証されている。何とか何とかと主張している。と指摘します。All these like kind of tongue twister type endings that you never hear when you speak to people. But they're second nature for me now, and that's happened very quickly, just from taking this approach of quality over quantity. I didn't study any of these things. I just got used to them very, very quickly. So that's the concept for today. Something to think about. Quantity over quality. I keep getting them mixed up. Hope that's useful. Please subscribe to the channel if you'd like more like this, and see you back in the next video.